listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are live from America and just outside the Matrix, way outside the Matrix today. It is time once again for the show that brings you the truth behind the headlines. In this case, it's pretty far back there, but we'll bring it to you here on the backstory. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan, and we are joined by two great guests today. Our producer Rod. Rod, you've done a great job. You got the guy on who I really wanted to talk to after war has broken out between Russia and Ukraine. An all-out assault by Russia. That's fair to say, don't you think, Rod?
Precise assault is what I would say.
Yeah, but they're not holding. They're serious, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the guy has been predicting this for weeks, months, I would say. Mark Sleboda will be joining us today, straight out of Moscow, on a great day to be straight out of Moscow. By the way, Rod, did you see that in St. Petersburg, Russia, home of the Revolution Exotic Pole Dancing Competition, I should mention, which I'm still willing to go cover, even though the next one's not till next year. But did you see in St. Petersburg, about 2,000 people were out on the streets protesting against the war? Did you see?
No, I didn't catch that.
Okay, so that was broadcast. What does that tell you?
That tells me, in my point of view, that tells me that a lot of the majority of Russia probably is in support of Putin and that this is a minority.
Yes, but still, here's what I'm saying. What you didn't see was the bodies of 2,000 people cut down in the streets or old ladies beaten up. Does that make sense? In other words, what we're told about Putin, the media narrative, you would never get a protest for 2,000 people against the war. Does that make sense? If he's
right.
If he's the dictator that they like to say he is, you wouldn't see that. But instead, there is some dissent. And I'll tell you, I'm seeing we'll talk about this with Mark Sleboda. I'm seeing some people, I saw Aaron Mate do it, the journalist Aaron Mate, was apologizing earlier, saying, I didn't think this would really happen. Well, I'm not going to apologize on this show. I still absolutely stand with Russia, and I'm very proud to bring you Mark Sleboda on the show today. And my guess is Mark's not going to be apologizing. Do you have a guess on that, Rod?
No, I don't think he's going to apologize.
Right, and not just, by the way, has nothing to do with me being on Sputnik. I'm going on Pete Santilli's show tonight. I won't be apologizing for it there either. I know that Russia's on the right side of this. The bombings of Donbass and the things like the Odessa massacre, everybody in the media, they didn't say a word about any of that stuff. You follow me, Rod? But now they care about bombings of Ukrainians, which were the residents of Donbass. By the way, they're still Ukrainians. That's who's being bombed there. But I'm not one of those people who's going to clutch my pearls and apologize. I think Vladimir Putin, anybody who's been listening to the show for the past few months, should not be shocked, because we've been bringing you what he's been saying. And I'll talk about what he's been saying right after this. We got Mark up in about 10 minutes. Is that right, Rod? He's coming in a quarter after?
Correct.
Okay, that was just a wild guess based on it's like midnight in Moscow. So there we go. Then in the second hour, great geopolitical analyst and political analyst Daniel Lazar. I'm actually very interested to see what Daniel says about this. That's one of the great things about doing the show. Is I said, I got a prediction about what Sleboda's going to say, but I don't know. How many times, Rod, do you pre-screen our guest and tell them what time? You're the producer here. If you're a producer for CNN, part of your job would be pre-screening our guests and saying, no, don't talk about that. Don't say that. Here at Sputnik, how often do you pre-screen guests?
I've only done it one time for one specific subject, so that's just one time.
And what was it? I don't even remember.
It was with I'm blanking on his name right now, but he's a professor at University of Texas, and that song that they sing is kind of controversial over there.
Oh yeah, right. I remember that now. They were singing a song. It was like, if I remember, sort of a Confederate. It was racist, a racisty history on it, and they still a football team over there in Texas sings it. So that's interesting. That's the one time. And what were you? Do you remember what you were trying to make sure of at that point?
Just to make sure if they could talk about it, and so pretty much it was just you. Pretty much I was telling you not to bring it up. So that the screening was you. And so I've never really screened a guest. The screening was you not to bring up that subject.
Yeah, and part of it is we have, unfortunately, anyone who listens to my live streams or listens to me on Twitter knows I can have a salty mouth. In fact, yesterday I told the bear joke. Remember that? Rod, remember the bear joke from yesterday?
Yeah.
I was on with Jason Goodman last night on our Patreon show, and I told the full-on, uncensored version of the bear joke, where it gets very descriptive. And I didn't do the script version here. Sometimes because of FCC constraints, like we can't swear, we can't talk about sex in a way that I think adults should be able to talk about. Is that correct, Saul, essentially? We got to watch out when it comes to sex, right?
No description of sexual acts and no profanity or no obscenity.
Right. Which, by the way, if you can't describe sexual acts or have profanity or whatever, or obscenity, I don't see the point of talking about sex at that point. You see what I'm saying? It seems kind of like it's no fun. It's like swimming in a raincoat. Let me just put it like that. So, but we have those restrictions. Aside from that, it's no holds barred. And I don't know what Daniel Lazard's going to say, and I don't even know what Svoboda's going to say, although I've got guesses because they've both been on in the past, and I'm looking forward to having both those guys. And I'll tell you what else I can't predict. I want you to call in, 202-521-1320. I'll talk about how I feel about things. We'll have 45 minutes to take calls after we talk to Mark Svoboda. And I want you to call in. I want to hear your opinion about it. If you have any questions about it, feel free to ask questions. If you come on, you're just a jerk, I'll dispense with you quickly because no one's got time for that nonsense. But that and more coming up on The Backstory. So I had publicly said the other day, Rod, that I stand with Russia on this. Let me explain what I mean by that. I want to be very clear on that because I still stand with Russia on this. Vladimir Putin has been, some people are like, well, what's Putin want? We know what he wants. He said what he wants. Even what we're seeing, some people are shocked that Kiev is getting bombed. Okay? You shouldn't be. Did you listen to Putin's speech last night as the attack started, Rod?
I saw clips of it. I didn't see the whole thing. But, yeah, I mean, he's been saying this stuff for a while, like you said, for years, and we've been hearing it. And I put the title up, they've tried the diplomatic route, and it just didn't work.
Right. And he and Sergei Lavrov, they were trying the diplomatic route. And as we've pointed out here, the U.S. never took it seriously. But what happened last night is he made the speech. He said that Ukraine's going to be demilitarized. Right? That was one of the things he said. So that's him saying, right, that's him saying what they're going to do. So some people are like, well, why is he going beyond Donbass? Because the Ukrainian military, which was apparently decimated in about an hour and a half, Scott Ritter was exactly right yesterday, like a hot knife through butter. The Ukrainian military was essentially taken out in about an hour and a half. You saw that, right, Rod?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of footage and video, and it's, war's not pretty. It's just not something you want to see.
Right, and that's why Russia, and let me point out this, and one of the reasons I absolutely stand with Russia and Vladimir Putin specifically is Putin avoided this for 8 years. a lot of people believe, and he said it at the end of his speech the other day, he waited too long. You follow me? Because 8 years is a long time to have had this nonsense going on in Donbass, this murderous nonsense. Okay? So I know that I don't like war, but when you're having a war to end a war, in other words, this is really an extension, I think, of what was started in 2014 when the U.S. overthrew a democratically elected government. And that's not me doing a whataboutism or whatever the hell people call it. That's me saying, understand this conflict started in 2014. It's not me saying it. Russia said it too, although I agree with them completely. This conflict started in 2014 when the United States, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, George Soros overthrew a democratically elected government. That's what happened. And I think 8 years is pretty patient and trying over and over and over again. They submitted a list of clear demands, things they wanted to see, including the Minsk Accords. We've talked about that for weeks now, right, Rod? The Minsk Accords were one of Russia's demands.
Yeah, and then we had Blinken come up there and pretty much make a fool of himself and say that they've never addressed the Minsk Accords. Right.
Yes. In fact, that's a lie. Anthony Blinken, you're a liar. By the way, you're welcome on the show. 202-521-1320. Saul, if Anthony Blinken calls, tell me on the thing. We'll get him on right away. I'm skeptical about whether he'll call or not. But I'm just saying. I want him to feel welcome as a guest. Kind of. But the U.S. has done this. And I'm going to say this to about maybe half or maybe even less. How much, here's a question for you, Rod. Just based on a complete guess on your part, how much of our audience would you say is Republican leaning, percentage-wise? 50 maybe? Or less?
No, I'd probably say like 35 to 40%.
I think that's right, especially the active people, the people who call in. I don't know who's out there listening quietly with YouTube push up against your ear under the covers, whatever you're doing. Let's get more detail. Saul put a stop to it. But my point is, we got like 30 or 40% Republicans. So let me speak to you people. As a Republican, you should not be supporting this Soros, Obama, Biden policy. I've said it over and over again. I'll say it once again. I saw this back when I went to Lebanon in 2013. The Obama administration is consistently on the wrong side of wars. They were on the side of Al-Qaeda and ISIS in the Syrian war, and they're on the side of Nazis. And understanding the Nazi ideology is central to the Ukrainian regime and what's driven things there. We might talk about that later, but let's go to a short break. When we come back, the great Mark Sleboda is joining us here on The Backstory.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back. You're listening to The Backstory. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan, who's been bringing you the truth about Russia and Ukraine for years now, ever since I found in the middle of Russiagate. I'm in the film Revealing Ukraine. You might want to go watch that film. It's especially timely right now. Speaking of timely, our intrepid producer, Rod, is fantastic at getting just the right guests at the right time. And now exactly who I felt like talking to today. We are very proud and honored to have someone I consider a friend of the show and a great resource for everybody out there, the great Mark Sleboda, straight out of Moscow. Hey, Mark, how you doing?
Lee, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on The Backstory, and I don't know possibly how much I could possibly live up to that flattery.
Well, it's easy. You'll do it by talking. So let me, because you're pretty good at it. So, and let me give you credit. I want to give you credit for it, Mark. You said on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, I forget when it was, but it was like a couple of weeks ago, that if people have been listening to you, they'd know Russia's taking this very seriously, and there's a real possibility of military action or words to that effect. Correct? You've been very consistent on this, right?
Pretty much since November, yes.
Now, so I'm gonna take the risk, Mark, of leaving the floor to you for a second. Just say whatever you want. What's your take so far on, now that hostilities have officially started? Vladimir Putin last night, of course, ordered the start of the war, and we saw a devastating military assault. What's your take on this so far, Mark Sleboda?
Okay, so obviously, this is a major military intervention flying directly against the U.S. and NATO allies who have essentially claimed Ukraine as their geopolitical territory and are extremely unhappy about having it taken back from them. And there are a number of reasons, there's never just one reason for military action. It's always a host of reasons that dovetail into each other. First, the Russian government does not consider that this regime in Kiev is legitimate, that it seized power with open U.S. backing in 2014 with the express purpose of, exploiting divisions, geographic, political, social in Ukrainian society, and use that to manufacture an anti-Russian regime in Ukraine that would, geopolitically flip the country, ally it with the West, and use it as a NATO military outpost against Russia. Two, eventually, the Kiev regime, facing resistance from its own people in East Ukraine, backed by Russia as the forces, as the regime was backed by the U.S., was forced to agree to the Minsk Accords for political reconciliation in the country, to reconcile what happened in 2014 between the new regime and the people of East Ukraine, right? Calling for broad autonomy for the regions, and so on, that would have protected the cultural, language, political rights of the people of East Ukraine, against the type of abuse that they were suffering. For 7 long years, the Kiev regime refused to implement it and made that perfectly clear, even as the United States, Germany, France were paying lip service to it and saying it was the diplomatic solution forward. But while they were doing that, the frozen conflict, but still a military campaign, artillery shelling, sniper fire, mortars, grenades on the people of Donbass was continuing every single day. Casualty count that crept up day by day by day for 7 long years. And Russia was also seeing the de facto NATOization of Ukraine on the ground as this was being dragged out. Some 10,000 NATO trainers and advisors in the country, the UK announcing they were building military naval bases in the country, tons and tons of weapons and ammunition being shipped to the regime by the U.S. and its allies that were, for those 7 years, being used only for one thing. That's to kill their own people in East Ukraine into subjugation to their seizure of power back in 2014. And Russia made this one last desperate, diplomatic effort over the last couple of months. And they said, this is our red lines. You have crossed our red lines. This is a Cuban Missile existential security crisis situation for us. No major power would accept this happening, this being done by a major opposed military bloc in a country right on our borders, much less with the historical and cultural ties. And we see people who identify with us just across your border being shelled day in and day out, their language rights, their political rights, their cultural rights taken away from them, while you're papering over all of this, proclaiming that this repression, that this ethno-political cleansing is democracy. And they also objected, which is part and parcel of it, to the eastward expansion of NATO, the huge growth in military drills, particularly with nuclear strategic bombers flying every day to Crimea from the U.S. And they said, enough is enough. You need to stop this, or we will take some type of military technical action to take our security into our own hands. And the U.S. compromised on nothing that was significant, none of their major demands, and made clear that they wanted to continue to drag this out because the status quo was favorable to their geopolitical project in Ukraine. And Russia said enough is enough. And over months, they built up the military forces capable of a major intervention in Ukraine. And I didn't trust what the U.S. military intelligence was saying on it. We all know from the Iraq weapons of mass destruction and everything that you don't trust them. But I was paying attention to OSINT, both on the Western side and on the Russian side, Russian language stuff that you may not necessarily be able to access easily. But I was paying attention to it. It was serious. It was the quality. It was the quantity. It was where it was being placed. It all made sense. And it was what a major intervention intended to basically the regime change that the U.S. helped install in 2014 would look like. And there was the question of, is it a bluff? Well, what good is a bluff that at the end you don't follow through on it? Well, in the last 48 hours, essentially, Putin followed through on it. First, he recognized the Donbass republics as independent, and then he used that as a launching board as attacks on the Donbass continued to announce this military intervention with these goals, and it is going to be a major one. And it is going to be, world-changing. The unipolar world is officially over, if it wasn't already there. This is the last nail in its coffin. But what is replacing it now, because of U.S. pressure, the continued pursuit of hegemony on Russia, on China, on Iran, on Venezuela, on Syria, all these other countries, is a bipolar world. We're back into another bipolar Cold War-ish type international scenario. And that brings us once again, I mean, Russian and U.S. military forces have literally been deconflicting in the same country, in Syria, for years now, where the U.S. is an illegal invader under international law. And now Russia has launched an intervention in Ukraine. And, you know, from a strict reading of international law, yes, that would also be illegal, with the ameliorating contextual circumstance that, well, that regime was put in place by a U.S.-backed putsch just, 8 years ago, that Russia will not accept and does not accept. So does that put Russia in the wrong? Well, that's entirely on your reading of the situation. But I know that I, have family in the region. My wife is Crimean, and my in-laws live in Simferopol, and we also have extended family all over East Ukraine, in Donbass, in Kharkov, in Odessa, and all of them are, none of them accept the regime that seized power in 2014, and all of them are ecstatic that Russia is finally doing something. They had long since given up hope that Russia would do something to help them, but they are now, and I guess better late than never.
Well, let's talk about some of the narrative stuff here, because I think, one of the things in the narrative in the past few months has been Russia's going to invade. I'm noticing all the media is calling this an invasion. And I think that use of the word invasion is significant when it's coupled with some other things that they say. You could quibble about whether this is an invasion. There are troops in there. That's kind of an invasion. But what they've implied by saying invasion over and over, I saw one headline call this a full-scale assault. I'd agree with that completely. This is an assault, a military assault. Period. I agree with that. Invasion, I'm not so sure about in the way they mean it.
There's a very clear distinction there, right?
Yeah.
It's actually pretty crystal clear. When the U.S. does it, it's an intervention. When someone else does it that is opposed to the U.S., then it's an invasion.
Well, and let me bring up one thing that Putin said in his speech last night as he announced this. He said, there are no plans to occupy. He also said, we're going after military targets. We're demilitarizing Ukraine. So far, what I've seen, and again, I'm just saying this so far, things could change immediately. But are you seeing the same thing that I'm seeing, Mark, that in fact, what Putin said about this going after military targets seems to be true? They seem to be targeting military targets, including ones in Kiev. Because again, if you're trying to demilitarize the country, you gotta do that. But so far, it seems to be aimed. And do you think, so A, do you think it's aimed at military targets like Putin said? And B, do you think he means it when he says he has no plans to occupy? Mark?
Okay, first of all, from the Russian government's perspective, the U.S. and its allies have lied about Ukraine from day one. They've lied about, and they continue to lie about their involvement in the Maidan, their open support of it, their intentions. They lied about the February 21st power sharing agreement that got Yanukovych to stand down his his police forces in Kiev, which allowed the right sector to the next morning seize the Rada and the presidential complex, and then Yanukovych fled and so on. The EU, France and Germany and Poland were the guarantors of that, and they just pretended the next day like it never happened, and allowed the Maidan to seize complete control of the country, even though it was actually representative by less than half the country supporting it. And they've lied about the Minsk Accords, the first round, the second round, lied and lied again. And Russia has no compunction about lying in return back to them if it's necessary for operational reasons. And they lied about a military intervention, that they weren't going to do it. And I called them on that. I've been, saying, okay, I know they're saying that, but they're actually building it up to do it. And I'm calling them on it again. They're lying again for operational reasons. I mean, they don't want to permanently occupy Ukraine. They want to get rid of the regime that the U.S. helped install there. So regime changing the regime change. And they want to put in place the politically repressed forces of East Ukraine, that have been repressed for the last 7 years in an attempt to return some type of constitutional order to the country. And that doesn't mean they're going to try to annex all of Ukraine. It doesn't mean that they are going to try to force Ukraine into their own military organization. They're going to try to return Ukraine to neutrality, what it was for all of its independent history since 91 until 2014. But that is going to require some period of occupation to facilitate a transfer to another non-Maidan government. And we've already seen the foundations of that. One of the Ukrainian Rada opposition bloc members made an address just last night to the country, to his own country, saying that, this regime seized power and has repressed us for the last 7 years, or last 8 years. We welcome the Russian and Belarusian intervention. Help us. And so that is exactly the type of political forces, what I would consider to be brave political forces to be speaking out at this point when Azov and Right Sector and the like are still running around the country with complete impunity. There will have to be some period of occupation of Ukraine. There's no question about that. It is not intended to be a long-term occupation, but they could very well get dragged into it. The U.S. is already promising to arm an insurgency. They've been training, right? This is in the U.S. press, right? It emerged in the last month. The CIA ground branch paramilitary was training Ukrainian right-wing forces exactly for this, which they assumed would happen eventually back in 2015. And if you don't believe that, these are far-right forces, the FBI itself has complained and issued reports about U.S. racists, white supremacists going to train with these people in Ukraine that the U.S. military has been training and then coming back and creating problems in the United States. So it's fine when they're doing this over in Ukraine, and as long as the primary objects of their hatred is ethnic Russians, Slovak East Ukrainians, and leftists, that's fine. But don't bring it back here. It's the same thing with the U.S. supporting right-wing death squads in South and Central America, and moderate jihadis in Syria and Libya who are directly allied with Al-Qaeda. They're geopolitically useful tools. And it's the same thing in this situation here. And Russia will have to deal with that. And it's not the first time, because during the beginning of the Cold War in the 1950s, the U.S., the CIA, was helping try to launch an insurgency in Western Ukraine by these just defeated Nazi collaborators in West Ukraine, the grandparents of many of these same people today. That was one of the, of course, really pivotal defining moments, of the beginning of the Cold War, where the Soviet Union said, you're seriously, we just defeated the Nazis and you're arming their fascist allies in West Ukraine against us? Okay, we see where this is going. And of course, well how many of the Nazi officials that the U.S. brought into their own military and research programs, and even into NATO command positions. It was said at the time by a U.S. by a Pentagon official, any bastard, as long as he's an anti-communist. And you could addend to that today, any bastard, as long as he is anti-Russian.
Well, and let me, so you're saying, and I agree with you on this, that some occupations can be necessary. But even that, there's a nuance in the word occupation, only in the sense that the narrative being put forward, and you could see this all over the U.S. media. You, of course, saw Vladimir Putin's historic speech the other day, where he started with the history lesson. He was attacked for that. Now, one of the things he said was that Ukraine didn't exist until after the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, which is historically completely accurate. Right before that, Ukraine and Russia.
State, there was no Ukrainian state. Yes.
Right.
That is correct.
And people are taking that and they're saying, well, he wants the USSR back, which is not the USSR, by the way.
Well, they weren't paying attention to him because all during that speech, he was attacking the communists. He was attacking Lenin for, the type of national construction that he did in the Soviet Union. They obviously weren't paying attention to anything he said because he was actually saying a lot of anti-communist things during that speech.
No, he was, and that's, I pointed that out. That's a good point, Mark. And part of the narrative is Putin wants to put that back together. Therefore, he's going to annex all of Ukraine. He wants to suck it back into Russia, in other words. And that, to me, is a complete misinterpretation of what he said in the speech. And I wouldn't expect anything like that for one practical reason. I know Vladimir Putin understands that being an occupying force where you've got some people who don't want you there is problematic. Mark, what do you think?
First of all, it's going to be extremely problematic. Much more problematic if Russia goes into West Ukraine, right? If they're in East Ukraine, the amount of resistance, small. A significant number of the people, probably the majority, sympathize. The further west they go, right, the less people and the more resistance. And in West Ukraine, it's like 95%, right? So hopefully they don't go there. they tell West Ukraine, okay, just sod off, go off to NATO, right? Let NATO deal with you, because they definitely don't want them there. I lost my train there.
Well, whether they're going to be annexing Ukraine.
Yeah. No. It's not Russia that wants to drag Ukraine back into their orbit. It's not that. It's that Ukraine was a neutral gray zone country between NATO and Russia up until from 1991 up until 2014. And that was essential for them keeping domestic peace, too, because the country is national identity divided with a Western half that hates Russians for historical and cultural reason, and an Eastern half that identifies with Russia for Eastern and cultural reasons. So that neutrality maintained by Ukrainian governments was necessary also for internal peace and stability. The U.S. broke that stability internally and externally by supporting the putsch in 2014. It's they who no longer accept a neutral Ukraine. That's why they never pushed Ukraine. They basically said, you don't ever have to fulfill the Minsk Accords. We're just dragging Russia out here while we continue what we want. You're never actually going to do what we agreed that you would do. You're never going to politically reconcile with the East. Eventually, you're just going to conquer them and take control of the whole country by force. It's the U.S. that does not accept Ukrainian neutrality, and Russia offered that again in diplomatic. Let's make Ukraine neutral again. Let's let them do that internally through the processes of the Minsk Accords. They don't join you. They don't join us. And they get to live with each other. How unhappy that is for the West Ukrainians and the East Ukrainians, but at least it's a restoration of peace between them and a peace between us. It's very similar to what actually was done in Bosnia-Herzegovina, which, is not comfortable, but has maintained the peace there, since the 1990s. But it's the U.S. who won't accept that. Who won't accept the neutral Ukraine and is bent on bringing Ukraine into NATO's geopolitical orbit. And they're willing to see the country burn in that effort rather than just, give it up and return it to neutrality.
Now, because you're in Moscow, let me ask you, too, we're starting to see some of the narratives here. Like I mentioned to Rod earlier, one of the Western media outlets showed video of a demonstration in St. Petersburg where a couple thousand people on the streets against the war, which showed to me it goes against the narrative of Vladimir Putin as a murderous dictator who doesn't allow any dissent. because there were people protesting. And I believe, sure, some people are going to be against this, but I'm curious what your take is. What do you think public opinion is going to be about this? Is Vladimir Putin going to get support, Mark?
Yeah, I think to a certain point, right? Again, it depends on how long this goes on and how many Russian boys come home, in uniform, come home in body bags over time as this goes on, how successful it is, what the results of it are going to be. But I would say that I think you will probably see somewhere in the 60s approval rating, right? We saw 70-some% of Russians supported the recognition of Donetsk and Lugansk just a couple days ago. We've already seen polls on that. I would say that probably some 60% of the population will support the intervention, at least in the beginning. But yeah, there will always be a few thousand people. This is the perennial, 1 to 2% pro-Western liberals right now that are protesting. And I can tell you, there are a lot more Americans protesting against the Iraq war, or even several other of the U.S. military interventions now than there are Russians protesting against this. And of course, they're going to try to make political hay out of this. The Russian people don't want this war either. Well, no one wants a war, but that doesn't mean they want what's happening in Ukraine to continue either. I mean, Putin didn't want a war, right? Russians don't want to be forced to kill Ukrainians. That's why, right now, all of the targets have been restricted to, not only have they been restricted to military, but actually the whole first round of strikes, they were cruise missile strikes mostly, some multiple rocket launch systems and so on. They were against military bases and institutions in Ukraine that had been refurbished by NATO member money for NATO member use and purpose in Ukraine, right? That's what they wiped out first, making that quite clear. Now, the intervention is going to go more than that, but it is certainly true that right now it's been restricted to military institutions, bases, and the Putin himself has pleaded with Ukrainian military and border guard and so on. Our fight isn't with you. Lay down your arms. Our fight is with this regime that seized power in 2014 and its military campaign that is conducted against the Donbass. It doesn't resent you. It hasn't done anything good for you. Lay down your arms and go home, and you'll be treated with respect. I think that shows as clearly as possible.
And I've seen it. It looks to me like a number of Ukrainians have taken them up on that and have laid down their arms. I saw some of these border crossings. The tanks were going across with no resistance whatsoever. Are you seeing the same thing, Mark?
Yeah, I've seen similar reports, and there's a lot of fog of war right now. And both sides, as part of military, the West and the Kiev regime and Russia and Belarus, right? There's a lot of intentional disinformation going back to moralize or to demoralize the other side. But I think I've seen credible reports, yes, that the Ukrainian Border Guard Service just basically either went home, surrendered, or defected, and some mix of the three, and they didn't really present any opposition. And again, Ukrainians' military is almost, the vast majority of it is a conscript military. These are young boys who were forcibly drafted into military service. And a lot of them, particularly those from East Ukraine, they don't want any part of this. And given half the opportunity, they will attempt to go home. A lot of them, like not all of them, but a lot of them, a significant amount of them. But of course, there are not only the far-right battalions, right, the Banderite battalions, Azov and Right Sector, but they have also thoroughly integrated into the military, the police, and the other security services, and they will not be happy with young boys trying to go home and having no part of this war. So, you could see a few bullets, theoretically, you could see a few bullets in the back of heads there, of people, particularly young Eastern Ukrainian boys who don't want to fight this fight.
Now, Mark, we've kept you up very late, and so we'll let you go in just 1 second. one final question, real quickly, just in a few seconds. One of the things Putin said was he gave a warning to the U.S. and NATO. Don't get involved. If you get involved, and I would say the very bellicose response from President Biden may be seen a very antagonistic response. Do you think the U.S. will come to regret that sort of rhetoric if they try to carry it out in practice? Mark Svoboda.
Yeah, I mean, Russia made a very bellicose warning, but for a reason. We are not going to, accept the NATO intervention here, and things will go south quickly. And we have very advanced hypersonic missiles and stuff so far, and we're ready to use them. Back off. And to be fair, Biden and NATO so far have said and stood by, and I see no reason for the change, that they will not military intervene, but they will escalate their economic war against Russia as much as they can, right? But I think Russia's well used to offensive, bellicose rhetoric from the United States right now. They only half hear it, and they don't take it too seriously.
Mark Svoboda, thanks so much for joining us. Fantastic appearance, as always, and a very important one today. Stay safe over there. Say hi to the crows, and, of course, your lovely wife. Mark Svoboda, everyone, straight out of Moscow. We got more coming up, including taking your calls, 202-521-1320. As war has broken out between Russia and Ukraine, we're bringing you the truth behind the headlines here on The Backstory.
Every day we ask questions.
How is Facebook going to prevent suicides?
Well, do you see this as being a human rights violation?
Are the cows really stinking up the planet that much?
To move ideas forward.
A gravitational wave is a ripple in the fabric of space and time.
I don't think the launch of the satellite proves anything at all.
Where do good ideas come from? We connect with independent thinkers, hear their ideas, and create stimulating debates on real issues.
The Dow is in a correction. As I said, commodities across the globe are collapsing. Why is that the case? Because we are in a global recession.
That is set to change because Iran has approximately about 50 million barrels, which it had put in storage during the height of the sanctions regime, and that's ready to be released as soon as possible.
Where is the money?
The super rich individuals and the world's biggest companies are able to hide money in tax havens.
Is there a solution to the crisis?
No, because I don't think anything useful has come out of any of the policy reform discussions with respect to financial reform.
They give us answers we aren't always prepared for.
What are the chances that the report would make Israeli authorities to review their policies towards the Palestinians?
Oh, probably zero.
This recession will be even worse than it was in 2008.
But that would be the nasty way for it to happen, But because of Guantanamo, the U.S. is no longer taking so many prisoners, so instead of taking prisoners, they kill people.
A lot of people think that he's now unelectable and a bad leader.
Wow, there's just so much information to take in.
Pay attention, there'll be a test on this later.
Taking notes.
Welcome to the show.
Wow, this is crazy. We're definitely talking sci-fi over here. From 20 years ago, people would never have believed this. Crazy times we're living in.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around this story. This is a fantastic story.
Yes, it is a fantastic story, and it's a worldwide problem.
Welcome to the party.
And we are back, 105.5 AM 1390 here in Washington, D.C., or there in Washington, D.C. It's like 5 degrees here, by the way, Rod, in Sioux Falls, and snowing. It's miserable. But, that's the life we live. So, 105.5 FM, AM 1390 in Washington, D.C. Taking your calls, 202-521-1320. Fantastic appearance. I want to thank Mark Svoboda again for joining us. And I think it's very important. Here's the thing. everyone's entitled to have an opinion on stuff. What I don't want to see from people, and I won't have very much patience for it, is outright lying about stuff. So if someone has a question about something, feel free to call in. But if someone wants to get something blatantly wrong, there's some things that are open to interpretation. And again, one of the reasons I appreciate having Mark Sleboda on is when I brought up the thing about we're not planning to occupy, Mark said, well, they're going to have to. Right? You heard that, right, Rod?
No, yeah, and I understand he's talking from a military point of view. And Lee, I want to add something that you might be missing. I know you don't really follow sports, but a lot of people follow sports. And there's two former heavyweight champions. They're one of the greatest pair. They're two brothers, the Klitschko brothers. One of them, Vitaly, is the mayor of Kiev. And these guys, I don't know if you remember them from Ukraine on Fire, but about a month ago, Vitaly Klitschko came out and said that he was actually training with the Ukrainian military and ready to fight, ready to fight to the death. I'm laughing because he's saying this as a politician. I thought he was serious. I spoke with Peter Oliver, and he was like, "No, he's just being a politician now and just saying something crazy like that." And they're out on social media right now, all over the place, pretty much demonizing Putin for attacking Ukraine. And so that's another form of propaganda. They do it through the sports, and so that's like a big wave to overcome. If people follow sports and follow these people who are getting this information from their point of view.
Yeah, and I think we'll need to watch out because, as Mark said, you're going to get propaganda on both sides. And obviously, Russia's been cagey about what they're doing for a while, and there's no doubt about that. But part of why I support them, and I say I support them, is they are on the right side. Well, here's what, for me to be wrong on my position, someone would have to convince me that the U.S. was valid, the Obama administration, along with Soros and Joe Biden, in overthrowing the government in 2014, Democratic elected Governor Viktor Yanukovych. Now, when I hear people talk about this, what was that, Saul?
Mullah from Utah is calling in.
Wait, say again.
Moola. Mullah from Utah.
Okay. Okay, Mullah from Utah. Hang on one second. That's hard to say. But I think the question I don't hear people asking, and it's an obvious one, is why? A lot of the things, or when they answer, their answers are silly. So, for instance, we know all these attacks have been going on in Donbass. Why? I see a lot of people mouthing off about this who never ask it. Or, why was Viktor Yanukovych gotten rid of? And the simple answer, but it's overly simplistic for a reason I'll explain in a second, is people say, well, the people in Ukraine were sick of him being corrupt. Well, everybody's corrupt. All the leaders over there are corrupt. And Yanukovych wasn't especially corrupt. Part of what it was is he'd gone with a deal with Russia. He got a better deal from Russia than from the EU. And if people doubt that, go look into it. And because he was going to go with that one, the U.S., Soros, the EU, fought against that. But the why question in Donbass has to do with the Nazi thing. It has to do with the background of the Banderites that I talk about all the time, because it's really important for people to understand. The Bandera thing is a real significant underlying factor. And if people don't understand it or blow it off, they're missing the point of what's going on over there. It's deep. 202-521-1320. Mullah in Utah. What's on your mind?
Hey, Lee. Thanks for taking my call. Appreciate it. Couple questions I would love your insight on is, I don't know if you're seeing a lot of chatter going on right now about the U.S. possibly having collaborated with Ukraine to put bioweapon labs near the eastern border, and that Putin would have concern about an unleashing of a bioweapon. There seems to be a lot of chatter about that. And also, wouldn't it benefit Biden at this point to see Ukraine go to Putin? I mean, my thought is the gig's up with his, money laundering with the Ukraine government. I don't see how they're useful to him anymore. So,
so on the bioweapons thing, I've heard people talking about that. I haven't seen anything from Russia on that. In other words, for me to, and Putin's been pretty straightforward about when he's got a concern about something that's come up. And so we'll see. You know, he called the U.S. an empire of lies. On the other question you asked, forgive me, what was the second question about? I just got lost in thinking about the first question.
To Biden's benefit to see Ukraine.
Yes. Forgive me. Sorry, I forgot there. No excuse. Mark Sleboda somewhat addressed this last time, and I've talked about it before on the show. I think you are likely to see a Western Ukraine break off, and that to become NATO-controlled U.S., and I'm not saying they're going to be a member of NATO, but controlled, U.S.-controlled Western Ukraine, because they're the real anti-Russian part, and going to be much easier for the U.S. to control. I think central Ukraine, Kiev, and certainly eastern Ukraine, the Donbass region, I think are likely to split off. And at that point, it might be easier for Biden and the U.S. because, Biden's really, to me, a lot of people like to insult Biden and go, well, he doesn't know what's going on. No, he does know what's going on, in my opinion. Right. He's got 40 years of working with Ukrainians. And
Leopard doesn't change his spots, even with memory problems.
No, right. And the people who are in place there are Banderite Ukrainian loyalists. And they're all throughout the state. We saw this with Russiagate. We saw people like Alexandra Chalupa, a Ukrainian-American, longtime Clinton aide and operator for the DNC, was right at the center of this. And she is completely a Banderite Ukrainian. And understanding that was part of why I was able to understand Ukraine as much as I do. It came in through Russiagate. So I think that we may see things, we may see a realignment of what is considered Ukraine. But I still think there will be some central Ukraine that is, because Russia, like Mark was saying, Russia has called for it, wants an independent Ukraine. And I think would like a democratic Ukraine, because I think they know that if people are actually allowed to vote, you get a fairer distribution of power balance than you're getting right now. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense. Absolutely. Can I ask you one more thing?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
A good resource, because I'm very limited on my understanding of the Banderites, Nazi, the whole thing on that. It's very vague to me, and I think it's probably to a lot of listeners. Any books or resources that you find particularly credible?
I think the best resource on this is Igor Lopatnik, who we've been lucky to have on the show a number of times. His first film about Ukraine, Ukraine on Fire. I'm in his second film, Revealing Ukraine, which is up on Netflix now. No, forgive me, it's on Amazon Prime. Free, you can watch Revealing Ukraine. But Ukraine on Fire is very, very good on that background. And it's complex, but I think very comprehensible. We got more coming up right after this short break on The Backstory.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are back. Welcome to the show that brings you the truth behind the headlines. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory. Once again, want to thank Mark Sleboda for joining us. Fantastic segment in the first hour. If you missed it, you want to go back and catch it when we're in repeats after the show. Don't stop listening now. Just go back later. That's my advice. Do whatever you want. I'm not going to try to control you on this. But Daniel Lazar is joining us later in this hour, where, of course, the main story today is the war that's broken out after Vladimir Putin announced an all-out assault on Ukraine to demilitarize Ukraine, something he seems to be doing very effectively. Mark Sleboda talked about that fantastic, very honest assessment from Mark Sleboda, who's been calling us for a while. So, again, if you didn't catch that, be sure to check it out. We got more coming up, including your calls, 202-521-1320, here on The Backstory. Now, the focus today is obviously on what's going on between Russia and Ukraine, but it seems like Carolyn from Maryland is calling in, and you have a topic that's not Russia-Ukraine. Is that correct, Karen? Or?
Yeah, and so if you want me to postpone this, I can handle that, but I was going to just let you in on some research that I've been doing about the criminal justice system if you were interested.
Well, try me, and then I'll see. Maybe I can work it in somehow, but go ahead.
That sounds good. First of all, I want to wish you happy week of 22222222222. But anyway, what I have been looking up on various websites, and yes, I did expect to find it, and no, I didn't, is I'm able to find out the number of incarcerated individuals in my state. And I'm not suggesting that every state is set up like Maryland, so it could be that in other states they're more enlightened and they operate that better. That wouldn't surprise me. But I attempted to look up, I was able to find the number of incarcerated. I was able to add it up. But I wasn't able to find all of the criminal laws. So I looked on all of the websites that I should have looked at, the websites that should have had it. And I wasn't able to find a number of laws, number of crimes that we have. You know, and I draw a dividing line between, like, traffic law, where you're only going to be issued a citation, and, you know, felony law. You know, I don't equate them, but they're still criminal laws. But the point is that I just found it peculiar that we are expected to find the laws. We're expected to look up the laws, and we can, you know, accessible are the number of incarcerated individuals, but it's not accessible how many laws we're expected to follow. I don't know whether that is the case in all states, but in Maryland, I've looked on 8 websites that it should have been on, and I haven't seen it. And I even asked for a librarian's assistance, and they concurred.
Well, I'll be honest. I'm not completely sure I understand the question, Karen. What's it?
Well, I'm not. I guess it's an announcement. I'm not telling you anything. But if you've attempted to look up such a thing yourself, I'm telling you that I wasn't able to find it. Have you ever attempted to look up the number of criminal laws in a particular state, or the number of criminal laws in existence, the number of laws that we're expected to follow, the actual number of them?
No, I've never looked that up. No.
Okay. All right. Well, I did not find that it was accessible information. Now, if it's buried in a book somewhere and it's not on the Internet, that is a different story, because I haven't combed the shelves of the library, but I spent a good deal of time on the Internet looking for it, and it's a reasonable expectation that it be there, but it wasn't.
Okay, that's interesting, but I've never looked it up, so I'm not sure what the answer is there. So, because we're dealing with the Russia thing, let me move on to that. 202-521, thanks for the call, Karen. 202-521-1320. Josh from Minnesota, what is on your mind today?
First off, just thank you for the show, sir. Always appreciate it. I'll get right to it. So my question is, I'm a guess, a redneck, for lack of better words, in the Midwest, and finding myself pro-Russian for. I'm just surprised to be here. But my question is for the regular American citizen: what interest, what benefit could this possibly give us, if any, for the American citizen, not necessarily for those in power? That's all.
Well, Josh, it's a great question, actually. And I'm going to be on the Pete Santilli show tonight. And Pete's a very conservative, pro-patriotic talk host. And I was thinking about my appearance there. And one of the things I wanted to talk about was exactly what you brought up, which is why should Americans care about this? But I'm going to say, are you still there, by the way, Josh? Or sometimes people...
Yes, sir. Just listening.
Okay. No, that's fine. Sometimes people ask their question and they hang up and run away. That happens. And not judging. But let me take it from a different perspective. What I'm planning to talk about tonight, and I've been thinking about it a little bit, so I'll try it out on you, is why Americans should care about this. And I'm going to make the argument they should care about it, but not for the reasons that we're being told we should care about it. That they should care about it, particularly if you're on the right at all, if you're a Republican at all, or just not, if you don't hate Trump vehemently. Knee-jerk reaction.
Yes, sir, I am on the right, and I do care about it, not for reasons I would have expected. I more see it as like a humanitarian crisis, with Russia being the good guy in this specific scenario. But for the patriot citizen of America that's sitting at home, is there anything they can grasp for to say, I support America for this reason because Americans will take this benefit home? Or is there really just nothing there for the regular American citizen to want out of this? If we were to be American, being a pro-war American, supporting Americans in this conflict, is there anything to gain?
Well, there is, but we're not backing the correct side. So part of what I think I'm going to say tonight, I'm not sure, is that part of why people should care about this is if you care about the deep state, the military-industrial complex, and you think that the country started to go wrong around 63 with the assassination of Kennedy, which I think a lot of people on the right, if you said that, they'd go, yeah, I agree. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense, Josh, so far?
Yeah.
So understanding the deep state, particularly the CIA's involvement here, and there's a reason Soros is involved. And the reason is his connections to the deep state, to the CIA and so on. And that's why I bring up stuff like this guy Lebed and the CIA's involvement with him. Because I think it's important for people to understand what's going on here is part of a huge pro-globalist propaganda war. And they're using this to help push that pro-globalist propaganda war. And this war happening right now is part of why I was saying for years during Russiagate, this is not about Trump. This is about Russia and Putin. They were salting the earth under Putin to try to make him a bad guy. I've seen it over and over again. And here's the thing. When I've looked into this stuff, for instance, about Putin, not only is he not the bad guy, but in many cases, he's on the side. I'll put it like this. Some of Putin's values, for instance, bringing religion back to Russia explicitly, right? Bring pro-family, stuff like that. His views are really anathema to the views of the Soros-connected, woke / New World Order globalist. And I think that's why they hate him. And I think the reason they're demonizing him, and it's amazing how effective it's been, because a lot of Americans who are independent thinkers, who don't trust the media, are all assuming the media got this one right. Well, if they said Putin's a bad guy, he must be. Why? Because they said. And they don't see, for instance, that a lot of the narratives against Putin, for instance, the Litvinenko narrative, was specifically pushed by Christopher Steele. Christopher Steele was the guy behind the Litvinenko narrative. And if they understood that and the deeper connections, I think they'd see that trying to trick people on the right is part of what's going on here. And because of the nature of war, and all I mean by that is war, for reasons that are completely understandable to me, brings up a lot of emotion with people because it's death on a mass scale, indiscriminate death often, where people were just in the wrong place at the wrong time and a bomb hit. That's scary to everybody, and I get that. But because it brings up a lot of emotions with people, people have a tendency to act on emotion when a war's going on, and the first thing that drops out of their heads is their critical thinking faculty. And I saw this with Syria, for instance. When I got back from Lebanon, it was very easy. I could lay it out now. I've done it 100 times. That the U.S. was on the wrong side, literally supporting ISIS and al-Qaeda, provably. But it's really hard for people to grasp that because it's much easier to go, oh, Assad's a monster or whatever. So right now here in America, it's easy to go, well, Putin, why is Putin doing this? Answer, he's a monster. Well, it's not true. There are reasons. What's going on in Donbass, I think if people were critical about it, they'd go, no, I don't support that. But
may I follow up?
Because
last question.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Josh.
When people start to begin to learn more about both sides of this war, if they do you see any blowback when people from the left find out that Biden's been pushing this war pro-Ukrainian, and we come to start seeing like different flags and different symbols that they might find offensive? Do you think this is going to really wake people up? Because ISIS, not a lot of people knew who or what they were. The name changed, but Nazis, we all know what that is. Do you see any blowback from just kind of skipping things, like telling people about Odessa, for example, in the news? Like a lot of people probably don't even know that happened here on the left.
I guarantee you they don't. They have no idea. People on the right have no idea about Odessa. It's just because it wasn't in the news. I'll tell you, this may be a bank shot. In other words, it's a little indirect. But I'll tell you, oddly, the thing I think is going to help this is what happened in Canada and the fact that Christina Freeland was right at the middle of that. Christina Freeland connected to Soros, connected to Klaus Schwab. She's a deputy over at the World Economic Forum. Okay. She's the deputy prime minister of Canada. And she was one of the people pushing for the bank seizures of Canadians. So I think a lot of people who didn't care at all about, let me put it this way. I've been talking about Christina Freeland on and off for 3-4 years now. But you know what? Now, if I say to people, Christina Freeland's a deputy of Klaus Schwab, a lot of people have heard of Klaus Schwab at this point, and everybody's heard of Soros. So if I go, gee, why is it? And here's the other thing. Because people like Trudeau were calling the truckers Nazis, right? The fact you've got somebody who's got actual real-life Nazi connections that she blatantly lied about, I think makes it a very ironic story. So I think people will start to get it. I think, oddly, because of the truck thing and because of the COVID thing and because a lot more people, 2 years ago, who knew who Klaus Schwab was? 3 years ago. Let's go 3 years ago. Prior to COVID, he was not a well-known name. Does that make sense, Josh?
Well, I'm just feeling like I'm starting to catch up on a lot of things, and largely in part to your show. And with that final thank you, I will let you go, sir. But thank you every day. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate it, Josh. Great call, and try to stay warm, because in South Dakota, it's like 5 degrees. So I can't imagine what it's like in Minnesota. Rod, you used to play football up in Minnesota. It gets chilly there, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's an understatement. Chili's understatement.
There we go. 202-521-1320. Let's go to our friend Tarif. Tarif, what is on your mind?
Thank you, gentlemen. I have full comments, if I can make it through. First, I'd like to say, free Julian Assange. He's so much important now. Everybody's starting to wake up to it. Another key word I'd like to say, denazification. Yes, it must happen over there in Ukraine. First comment dealing with Trudeau. The reason why they had to rescind all that stuff they was talking about with the Emergency Act, it seemed like the bank run worked. They made people panic, even people that probably was supporting the truckers, because once they put the freeze on different things, people can pay their medical bills and their car notes up there. So when the banks start opening again, they start taking out their money. So it was the bank run actually turned the tide and made the government and the banks panic. My second comment, I have two more after that. My second comment, I come to find out the Azov Battalion, the neo-Nazis members, the neo-Nazis that's in Ukraine, they part of some sick little group where when they find out they rape women, rape children. After they finish raping them and some other people, they take out the organs and they sell it on the black market. Now we have reports of ISIS being in Ukraine now, fighting against the Russians and them bads. All right? Zelensky, my third comment, made a stupid move talking about he was going to get nuclear weapons. Once he talked about start getting nuclear weapons, now mind you, I just say you have the Azov Battalion, you got the neo-Nazis already there, you got the corrupt oligarchs that will sell anything to anybody, right? So you got them two groups, and now you got ISIS. It forced the hand of Putin to invade and take over those certain areas where they have the ability to make nuclear weapons. He had no choice. Because if those Nazis and ISIS got their hand on nuclear weapons, you would see cities throughout the world go up in smoke. My last comment, China, they were sending a message throughout the day. They're still supporting Russia. They're buying as much wheat from Russia as possible. They're building as many pipelines to Russia as possible. And also they sent in the fighter jets, the bombers into the Taiwan ADZ zone, and also the Navy ships in that Taiwan area too, to send a message to Taiwan and then the rest of the world. I think it's best for Taiwan to talk to China now, because Russia got Taiwan's back. Russia got China's back, and and China got Russia's back. So that's where we at. We're in a unipolar world now. Thank you, y'all, for letting me explain my comments.
No, great call as usual, Treve. You bring up a lot of important points there. And Saul, here's what I want to do. Who we got on the line next?
David from New York.
David?
Yes, David.
Okay.
From New York.
Okay, so here's what we'll do. I'm going to take David's call. Then I know the speech is 22 minutes. We can't play the whole thing. But then we'll play about 5 minutes or so of the Biden speech. Okay?
Okay.
So let's go for that. After we talk to David in New York, what's on your mind, sir?
Hi. By the way, I'm a first-time caller, but I've listened to your show a lot, and I really appreciate a lot of the things that I hear on your show, particularly today with the interview with Mark Sloboda. I really appreciate that. My comment has to do with the intense media narrative, in favor of the mainstream position against Russia. It's so intense and so uniform that without shows outlets like yourself and a few others, there would be no way to get the other side. I'm worried about the possibility that shows like yours could be a war of cancellation could happen against people who espouse these views, or alternative views, or even try to expose the alternative sources of information. I mean, think about like the Russiagate situation. Anybody who doubted the Russiagate narrative was basically canceled. Okay, and then with COVID, same thing. Anybody who doubted the official, I'm not trying to say anything about my opinion on the official narrative, but anybody who doubted anything about the official narrative on the COVID situation was canceled. The Hunter Biden thing was completely suppressed. If you tried during the election, if you tried to bring that up, then you were canceled. Well, same thing here. Okay, I'm really glad for shows like yourself, but there's the worry that all potential. The previous caller says, is there going to be any blowback? I don't think there's going to be any blowback. Did the left suddenly come to realize that RussiaGate was a hoax? I don't. They still. I mean, I'm sort of on the left myself in a sense, but not that kind of left. But the liberal people who are so pro RussiaGate, have they relented? Have they, even with the evidence against it? Anyway, that's my comment. Is that I'm worried about cancellation.
Well,
I hope.
David, it's a great comment. It's a great call. Thanks for calling anytime. So I would be lying if I said it's not occurred to me, because this is my job, among other things, that I'm concerned when Biden's calling for sanctions and stuff like that. We got Keir Starmer over in the UK calling for our TV to be taken off the air. But I will tell you, I think we're at a weird point now where I think our listenership would go up if we got canceled. Because I think at this point, people have a feeling. Now, I'm not saying everybody, but I'm saying a significant number of people feel like if they're trying to hide it from you, there must be something to it. And I think the COVID-19 thing, I think you could see that with Joe Rogan. By the way, Joe, call me. I'm here. Anytime you want to spend 3 hours together, I'll head down to Austin. Don't worry. But I think people now think if something's been canceled, it's probably true. And so in a sense, if they tried to censor us, and don't forget, we've already got some, what I'll call soft censorship. If you go on YouTube, for instance, it says we're Russian-funded media and so on. And, but I think it could backfire on them in a way that they're not anticipating, or they may be anticipating it at this point. But again, I appreciate the concern, David. Let's go to Brave in Atlanta. Brave, good to hear from you. What's in your mind, sir?
Hey, how's it going, Lee? Yesterday I was trying to call. I was actually trying to call in to raise what you actually ended up bringing up. The Victoria Nuland FDEU comment. I was actually hoping that you could go into a little more detail about it. I think it's a pretty cool topic just as it relates to what's going on now. Also, to the last caller, I totally agree with his concerns as many people do, because like for instance, Russell Brand did a show talking about covering Homeland Security and how they are now looking into more censorship on social media, and the way they're now it's been building, but the way we see them throwing around the terrorist label, and of course with congruently with the title of misinformation and disinformation. So I think we have a right to be very concerned about the cancellation, and not just that, but the tactics that our government is taking as far as trying to suppress voices and things of that nature. But again, my main reason for calling was to see if you would go into more depth about the Victoria Nuland FDEU comment and what that was actually centering around. Because when you look it up online, what they're actually saying is that it was, again, Russian disinformation and stuff. So I'll leave it there.
Well, you can, first off, it being Russian disinformation, you can hear the freaking phone call yourself. Just listen to what, I'm not mad at you, Brave. If I sound spazzy, it's just the way I am. But Jeanette, I'll get to you in 1 second. But listen to the phone call. What it was about was Victoria Nuland was talking to the ambassador over there, Gregory Payat, and they were trying to figure out, after the coup, who would be in place in the government. And she's talking about it. And he brings up the EU's concerns. That's where she says F the EU. But she's picking who's going to be in the government. That's an American State Department official selecting who's going to be in the government. And as Ray McGovern has pointed out, he's the first person I heard it from. Usually when they get caught in something like that, they can't go through with it because they've been caught. Instead, it went down exactly like Nuland said it would. This is how brazen they were. She said, we're going to put this guy in charge. It won't be yachts. Just don't listen to it. And that's who was put in place. So Russian disinformation is one of those terms that gets thrown around. It's like Christina Freeland said, the idea that her grandfather was a Nazi was disinformation. Well, her grandfather was a Nazi. When that came out, nobody in the media went, oops. I guess disinformation is a term they use when they don't want us to know something. The Hunter Biden laptop was disinformation. Disinformation, let me translate. I don't speak much Russian, but I think disinformation is an English word that means actually true. I'm not sure. But it seems like that's the way it gets used. So let's go to Jeanette in, I believe, North Carolina. Am I right on that's all?
That's right. I'm in North Carolina, but
Okay. I didn't want to pick the wrong Carolina. I'm sorry. Hey, Jeanette, how you doing?
That's okay. I'm originally from New York, so I have no dog in that fight.
Okay, good.
In the Ukraine. Now, 14 years ago, it was right after the Orange Revolution, where Victor, I can't even pronounce his name because I speak lousy Russian, Yagvanovich was elected, and then they had this revolution, and they got the other Victor in who was married to an American woman. On personal experience, I had a child by a surrogacy in the Ukraine, and the United States consulate accused me of, I don't know why they did, I had a contract and everything. They accused me of being a human trafficker, and immediately the Ukrainian SBU came and arrested me and threw me into an old Russian jail and kept me there.
Wow.
The newspapers went, then the newspapers went crazy saying I was it was so yellow that nobody believed it. It said I was a cannibal and I got her to eat her. And anyway, I was trapped there for months and months and months and months, never got my daughter back. And the United States, I mean, we tried to get people here, you know how you try to get the United States to help somebody who's been arrested? In fact, the consulate got me arrested, kept me in jail, and Burr over here said I deserved to be in jail. And, of course, eventually I got out. I basically bribed people and came home without my daughter, and I got exonerated by the Ukrainian government. Finally, it went all the way up to whoever their top person is. But it doesn't really matter. I don't have a daughter. And the thing is, what was shocking to me is how much the United States government just lied and lied and lied. And when I came back to the United States, they then accused me of doing all these things I also didn't do. But since they couldn't prove it, I also got exonerated there, too. But at that point, I began to realize I got to see the inner workings of things that most people don't get to see, and I was pretty jaded. Further, I have friends who live in Russia. I have a lot of friends who live in Russia because I want to move to Russia. So they've been telling me about the Russian bombing of Donbass for, since 2014? And all my friends that I had met there don't live there. And you know where they've all gone to? Russia. I mean, if you're Ukrainian, you can get Russian citizenship just lickety-split, just show up. And most of them there's an awful lot of Russian citizens, Ukrainians who have become Russian citizens. I mean, and they're sad because my experience in the government there is what they tell me. That place can't govern itself out of a wet paper bag. And the United States and the EU is in there just throwing money and just doing all sorts of terrible things in there. It's people are living in the Ukraine. You have underground malls and everything, and in the subways, the metros are all underground. And there's so many street people down there because they're starving, and there's so many beggars, and it's just a sad sight. And this is Kiev. This is their big central city, It's terrible. They cannot govern themselves. It's just terrifying. And like I say about...
Well, Jeanette, let me ask you to call back again. I got to get one more call. Then because we got Daniel Czar coming on. But call back sometime. You have fascinating and harrowing, I don't know what else to say, but they sound harrowing stories, that I'd love to hear more about sometime. So, Jeanette, thanks for the call. Please call back sometime. Let's quickly go to Sam. Right, Saul?
No, Pam. Arlington.
Pam. I was close. I was only a consonant off, but completely wrong gender, probably, unless it's a Samantha, which I know one. But anyway, Pam, sorry about that. Pam, what's in your mind?
Well, of course, Russia. And yesterday or recently you were talking about you didn't understand why the Nazis in Ukraine are so upset about the purity of, the lack of purity of Russians. And I have a solution to that. The Mongols invaded Russia and there was intermarriage. And I've had friends, when I lived in India, a lot of Mongols and Russians came to live in the town where I lived, where His Holiness the Dalai Lama lived, and to attend teachings. Mongols are, and also Russians. Russians are Buddhist, some, and but Mongols generally are. Anyway, the thing is, I've known a lot of so-called white Russians, but if you look at their eyes, they look Asian. The eye part of them looks Asian. So there's, there was this happened like in the 13th century AD, so, or whatever, AD. So a long time ago. And that's what offends the people from Lviv, the LVIV, the Poles, that they want a pure country. And this was said, did you know that Gabriel, the BBC reporter who was at the Maidan, he finally did a decent report just as he was leaving where he exposed the people of the Maidan rebellion as Nazis, right? And he interviewed one of them who was talking about, all we want is a pure country. We just want it purified, right? That's all we want, a country of pure people. So really up to regular. Anyway, LVIV, I've been reading recently, before all the big blow-up, that the Polish Nazis in Ukraine were thinking of moving the capital from Kiev to LVIV, however that. It's right on the border with Poland. It used to be in Poland. I looked it up in the Wikipedia, and it was cited one of the worst of the Nazi atrocity. It went on for 2 months of a pogrom. It was one of the worst that the Ukrainian, now Ukrainian Nazis did. So they would like that to be their capital, of course. And when I was... you're exactly right. I'm not going to go because of we're up against the time here, but everything you're saying is exactly right. It's not that I understand that pure Slav thing. I don't identify with it. In other words, I get it intellectually, but to me, it's nuts and wrong. And chill out about that, everyone over there. But you're exactly right. And I've been saying, I mentioned it on a show recently, it looks to me like when the CIA, the U.S. Embassy, and a number of officials, it looks like they are in the process of moving the capital from Kiev to Lviv, I think it's pronounced, but I could be wrong on that. I probably am. But anyway, Pam, fantastic call. Important stuff for people to understand. And we'll talk about more at some other point. Quickly, want to go to a break because we have, and let's go to a double here, Saul, okay? Our friend Daniel Czar is joining us right after this on The Backstory.
In traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want the record.
Let's talk about that.
Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show,
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
And we're back. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan. This is the Backstory, the best damn radio show in the world, and vital listening right now as war has broken out, as Vladimir Putin last night announced full-on assault and demilitarization, his term, of Ukraine. And I was up, I don't know, but Rob, were you up late following coverage at all? Because I was up till like 1 in the morning. You?
No, not that late.
Okay, you're saner than I am. But, you know, I got, you know, what else do I have to do? But I was so trying to track it and figure out what's going on and everything, you know, to prepare for the show. Also, because I'm interested in it. And it's, if you think about it, this is a huge historic event, right? Is that, would you agree with that, Rod?
Oh, no, 100%. This is, but historic kind of in a bad way, because like I said, a war's never good to see, you know, people dying. There's a lot of innocent casualties that get caught in this as well.
Right, and we'll see how that all works out. But fantastic show, and we got more. Do we have Jared's book for tomorrow? Are we all set on that?
Yeah, we'll talk about that after the show. Should be all set for tomorrow.
Okay, we have Jared Kappas on the show tomorrow, who's a huge expert on the subject of Ukraine. And the situation with Ukraine, there's a good deal of complexity to it. I think it's understandable. There's a good deal of complexity. So many great calls today. Thanks, everyone. I can't even remember. But between Jeanette, Pam, Brave, I'm going back trying to remember, Tarif. Who am I missing?
Josh from Minnesota.
Yeah, fantastic calls, everyone. Thanks so much. Great calls. Now joining us on the line is a great friend of the show, very smart dude, Daniel Lazar. Hey, Daniel, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good, although it's, you know, harrowing, life during wartime and all that. So let me do this, Daniel, because I'm going to do to you what I did to Mark Sleboda when we brought him on. I'm just going to open the floor to you and ask you a very broad question. You can answer however you want to. What's your take on what we've seen in the last 24 hours, Daniel?
Well, I mean, it really is epical. I mean, this is a transformative event. I mean, I think we've sort of passed from one period of history to another period of history. You know, I mean, previously, some semblance of international law seemed to apply. You know, it was hypocritical. There was a good deal of violence, immense violence, you know, around the edges. But the world was kind of ruled according to certain basic laws, basic rules, and they sort of kept a very imperfect peace, but a peace nonetheless, in which there was great progress, by the way. I mean, since 1945, life around the globe has been transformed many times over. But now we're leaving a stage, we're leaving that stage behind and entering a new stage where kind of the Israeli model will increasingly apply, and that is, if you're a prime minister somewhere in country X, and your neighbor is giving you a hard time, and you're pissed off and irritated, you just send in the troops and wipe him out. And the problem is that the more that becomes a model worthy of emulation, the more these conflicts tend to work on one another and to sort of develop into a chain reaction. You ever seen the well, you were probably alive in the 1950s when they used to show how a chain reaction actually works. They put a bunch of mouse traps with ping pong balls in them, and they would put them and they'd throw one ball on them, and then suddenly you'd have this giant explosion. Well, that's what can happen if every country sort of adopts this model. So I think that Putin was kind of pushed to the wall. He has got a lot of legitimate grievances, but I think going into the Ukraine in this way is going to open up a real can of worms. It's going to be really something. And I think the war could very easily spread. I'm not sure Biden will be able to stay out of it. U.S. troops may be committed directly. So I think the war could very easily spread beyond the Ukraine's borders. And if that happens, holy Jesus, Jesus, Mother of God, there could be a real conflagration. So that's
let me just add to what you're saying a little bit, because the other thing that's going on here is you've got a unique situation in that Russia's perhaps the only country on earth, possible exception China, maybe one or two others, who can back up the tough talk with a very tough military, a very tough, professional, modern military, as we're seeing in Ukraine. So I think that makes it even more tricky because, as you say, this is a lot of times you'll see people saber rattle, but at the end of the day, and I would even put the U.S., and I'm curious about your take on this, in that position. We can talk tough, but I think we've shown in places like Afghanistan that our military right now is, and I'm trying to be objective and fair. Our military is kind of inept right now. We're not particularly good at things. We've had Scott Ritter on the show saying that our military is unprofessional in the sense they're not used to fighting the kind of warfare that we'd need to fight in Europe. They're used to going house to house in the Middle East, and that's a very different thing from what we're seeing. And so I think that makes it even more complex. Daniel, what say you?
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, I think, well, first of all, I think that when you said that Russia and China are two countries in a position that are able to, not only rattle their swords, but use their swords, Israel is a third and America is a fourth. I mean, since, after, post-Vietnam, America has been on a rampage since at least 1989, when the U.S. sent in, thousands of troops in order to retrieve a 2-bit drug smuggler named Noriega, and managed to kill several thousand people in the process. And that was a lot of fun. And since then, it was so much fun. The U.S. has done it again and again and again, and can't stop doing it. So America has sort of set the model, set the tone for this new age. But the trouble is, it's just going to be out of control. And I agree. I mean, the American military is completely a joke. It's a bizarre formation. But it has. I mean, Biden has really opened up a real can of worms here, and with a little help from his friend Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, and now, what do you see? How do you see this? Let's talk about a couple of ramifications of this. One of them, the U.S. has imposed every time. I had a history teacher once who had grown up in the 50s, and he said, He remembered the age when every movie trailer was for the biggest extravaganza in the history of Hollywood. The next week at the local theater, it was always the biggest extravaganza. And after you see that same trailer about 8 times, you start going, okay, I got it. This one, too, is the biggest one. And it's the boy who cried wolf effect. So every set of sanctions we impose, this is it. These are the serious sanctions. These are the most severe ever, right? That's every one. And like the movies, they do it every week, basically. So Joe Biden was out there saying, we've imposed the toughest sanctions ever. What do you see the effect? We talked about Russia's military strength. Can they withstand sanctions? How's that going to affect? How does, for instance, Germany not canceling but suspending certification Nord Stream 2? By the way, I make that distinction because I've seen some people misreport it. Germany did not cancel; they suspended, which means they could come back. But how do you see the sanctions and oil prices and everything else affecting things, Daniel?
Well, I think the sanctions will hurt in Russia, but I am pretty confident that Russians, by and large, will blame them on the U.S., not on Putin. That Russians will say they're under attack, they will hunker down, they will adopt a kind of a nationalist outlook in which they blame the U.S. rather than their own government, and not illegitimately. On the other hand, I think that skyrocketing energy prices are going to wreak havoc in the West. I mean, Germany, for example. I mean, gas prices are already rising dramatically, and they're going to rise even more so as a consequence of this. And when that happens, I mean, when Germans are really hurting, when their factories are closing, when their homes are cold and and all those things, when that happens, the average person is going to start asking himself, well, how the hell did we get into this mess? And their press, their experts, their leading journalists will explain that it's all Putin's fault, but it'll be very easy to see through that. And in the U.S. as well. I mean, the U.S., we have a really interesting situation. I mean, first of all, gasoline prices have already risen dramatically. But now they're around $5 a gallon in certain parts of the country. What happens when they hit $10 a gallon? And how will Americans respond? Americans can't find the Ukraine on the map. They have no idea what the conflict is about. All they know is that some Democrats in Washington are very upset, and what do they care about that? And then you have the interesting thing that Donald Trump has essentially come out with a pro-Biden, point of view. So how is that going to work in American politics? Remember, the best case scenario is that things kind of go back, sort of settle down to a low simmer, and the war doesn't spread. And so, therefore, all you have is is skyrocketing energy prices to deal with. So, if that happens, how will the average American respond? I tend to think he'll in a few weeks he'll end up being really pissed off at the Democrats and really unhappy with what he's being put through, and will wreak vengeance at the polling booths. So that 2022 in November could turn out to be a referendum, not only on Joe Biden, but on Joe Biden's war.
Well, the Republicans have already clearly laid out their plan on how they're going to play this as an election issue, which is, and Donald Trump was leading the charge on this. Basically, the Republican argument is this wouldn't have happened under Donald Trump and the Republicans. And I think, in a way, they may be right. I think Trump may be right. Do you think this would have happened under Trump the same way, Daniel? You're not a fan of Trump. I'm just trying to, say, I think he may have a point here, that it wouldn't have gone quite the same way. What do you think?
I'm not a fan of Trump at all, but I'm not a fan of Biden either. And I think it's pretty damn ironic when we have to look to when the Republicans are the peaceniks and the Democrats are the warmongers, because that's not the way it was for many a year, in the 1970s and 80s. But Trump himself is erratic, but Trump himself is very sympathetic to Putin and notoriously hostile to the Ukraine. So I think that Putin would have gotten a hearing in Washington, for better or for worse. I feel sorry. I think the Russians have been very ill treated by Washington, but I think the Ukrainians have gotten a raw deal as well. They live in a country which is deeply unstable, which is linguistically, politically, ethnically torn. That per capita income in the Ukraine is actually lower now than it was in 1989. That's the only place in the Eastern Bloc, including Russia, where that's the case. They live in a failed state, and there's nothing worse than living in a failed state, because that means that you're condemned to failure yourself, and you can't do anything about it. It doesn't matter how hard you work, you're just going to be dragged down. And so, so that's the plight of the Ukrainians. They have, neo-Nazis running wild. They've got an ineffectual government. They've got a President Zelensky who's hanging by his fingernails and could either be arrested by the Russians or strung up by the neo-Nazis tomorrow. And so it's a really dreadful situation, a real mess that the Democrats, who are so good at creating messes, look what they did, and look what the it's not the only Democrats' fault, but look what the Americans did in Afghanistan. Look at the mess they created there, and that is very similar to the mess they have created in the Ukraine.
Well, and let's talk about talked about gas, natural gas. So one of the things is I'm seeing lots of people, including especially Republicans, act like, well, it's real easy now. We're just going to sell gas to Germany. Well, it's going to be higher price because the U.S. is further from Germany than Russia. And I don't think the Germans are going to be thrilled with the U.S. paying higher natural gas prices. But what do you think of this as a possibility, Daniel, that one of the moves Russia could make, they've done this in places like Belarus before, is take the gas that was going to go to Germany and instead make sure Ukraine gets it, and Ukraine gets some jobs out of it. So it helps the Ukrainian economy. And Russia's done it with Belarus before, where they've more or less subsidized other countries' economies by giving them good energy prices, as they could do with Ukraine, which would help the people of Ukraine, because they've had big energy shortages over there. But it seems to me that they're actually creating a scenario by which Russia and Putin could help Ukraine using natural gas as an economic poker chip, as it were. Daniel?
Yes, one of the ironies here is that Biden's actions are helping to drive up the price of energy, the price of natural gas included. And so therefore, while Russia is being hit by sanctions, and its economy is taking a real hit, and in a certain sense, U.S. policy is to drive up the value of its gas reserves. So what the U.S. taketh with one hand and giveth with the other hand. So Putin has a very valuable economic asset in the form of that natural gas that he's no longer selling to Germany, which he can then use in various ways for economic and political benefit.
And we've already seen that, for instance, with China, where China is going to be the recipient of some of that natural gas. And China, in turn, is saying they'll buy wheat from wherever in Russia. When they said basically wherever in Russia, that means the Donbass. as well. That's what they're talking about. So in other words, while the U.S. is sanctioning the Donbass region and saying we're not going to let anyone invest over there, not making any friends in the Donbass at all, not that they care, China is going to be making some friends in Donbass. Right, Daniel?
Yes, I think so. I think when empires fall apart, it's not pretty. The only thing worse than an empire is a failed empire. And so when an empire like the U.S. falls apart, vacuums up and open up, various players rush to fill it, and conflicts erupt. So I think that the Ukraine is an example of that. But the U.S. is weakening. It's grossly extended internationally. The U.S. military's strategy is based on this concept of a two-front war, where it's supposed to be able to fight two wars simultaneously and different corners of the globe. But the U.S. is now facing three conflicts in the Black Sea, the Persian Gulf, and the South China Sea, and that's too much. And therefore, its weakness is exposed, and therefore Russia and China find themselves being drawn together against the common enemy. And they find themselves, whatever their differences, they find themselves making common cause because China sees the U.S. as much of a threat as Russia does. China thinks that the U.S.'s behavior is out of control, and China thinks it needs reining in. So a Russo-China alliance, and perhaps even a Russo-Sino-Iranian alliance looks more and more likely. And then there's India, by the way. And India has been notably sympathetic to Putin. So the U.S. is finding that large portions of the globe are not happy with what it's doing, are holding back support, and they all sense that U.S. hegemony is fading very rapidly. And that these events in the Ukraine are the latest manifestation of that fading out process.
Okay, now Daniel, this is going to be a tough one. You can handle it though, but you'll see why I'm saying that in a second. This is a tough question for you, because I mentioned before. Look, watching the run-up, and now that we're in a war, it does put knots in your stomach. You know what I mean? It makes a lot of tension for everybody. I don't know if you've been feeling it, but I can't imagine you haven't because you're a human being. So let me ask you this, Danny. Here's the tricky question. Try to put the most positive spin you can on how this could work out. What's the best case? I know you're not even saying you think this will happen, but what's the best, most positive thing you can imagine coming out of all this? Daniel?
The most positive thing, if everything worked out in an absolutely optimal sense, is that Vladimir Putin, punishes the Ukraine. He then works out some kind of settlement, some kind of rapprochement with Zelensky, in which Zelensky agrees to adopt neutrality. And the U.S. Recognizes that as a way out, and then everyone goes happily back to work. But I can think about about 24 reasons why that won't happen. But I think that is the best thing that could happen.
Okay, but let's just leave it on the happy part, shall we? Just to try to, so everyone can get to sleep tonight. Daniel Lazare, great appearance. Thanks so much for joining us. Always a pleasure and honor to talk to you. Thanks so much to Mark Sloboda, and really thanks to all of the callers. Too many for me to even remember my stroke-addled brain. We'll be back tomorrow on the best damn radio show in the world. Thanks to Rod. Thanks to Saul. Thanks to everybody here at Sputnik. I stand with Russia. You should too. Talk to you tomorrow on The Backstory.